first thing they should do is like just put out a press release. We don't need to learn anything new about the game, but it's like Elden Ring will have difficulty options, and just like, well, like that's what I want. I want chaos.
All right. Why, hello there. Today is day 698 since Elden Ring was first announced at E3 2019. And joining me on the Elden Wait today is a Souls fan, a journalist, a games critic, and we are going to talk about Souls and Elden Ring today. Welcome, Patrick Klepek.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Happy to be here.
yeah.
Happy to pass the time away as we wait for anything
Yeah.
about Elden Ring.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're almost at 700 days now, and I think, you know, I can't speak for, so like I've been following Elden Ring probably too closely as someone who's just always like for Sekiro, I did content on my channel like pre-release following it, and I feel like with Elden Ring it was just like this, oh, something will come out soon. We'll just keep vamping, and then I've been vamping for almost 2 years. And it's like,
I know. Well, usually they get announced, and then it's like, oh, this is the beginning of the marketing
yeah,
campaign. Like there'll be, Sekiro was, had the teaser at the Game Awards, and
yeah,
then there was a demo at at E3 like the following spring, and it's just
yeah.
ah.
Yeah, so there's kind of, at least for me, I'm like, if we get to this E3 and nothing pops up, which I'm optimistic, but at this point, I've been burned by at least 2 TGAs and
I'm
multiple events.
optimistic. I have reason to be optimistic.
Yeah,
I would give you reason
yeah,
to be optimistic. I don't know if I'd go to Vegas and
yeah.
put a bet on it, but I did recently talk to someone that expressed some informed confidence that
Yeah,
there'll be something at E3. But again, I get the issue is that this so much of what's going on with this game has changed so much that
yeah,
even the person that I talk to that normally is like rock solid on stuff is like, I don't, Elden Ring, got throw my hands up. I don't know,
yep,
I've heard there be a trailer at E3, but I don't know. Don't kill me if there's not one there. And I
yeah,
was like, all right, all right.
yep, yeah. I'm in a similar boat where I know a few people, but like it's like I was curious in getting your perspective there because and I'm already derailing my schedule, but this is how it goes. So just as someone who is intimately acquainted with the industry, like to me, From Software is like super reclusive. Is that just true for everyone everywhere? Like even in your position, is From Software just really hard to like know stuff about?
I mean, I don't know that they're all that different than a lot of
Yeah.
Japanese studios. Their development and marketing culture is just a little
Hmm.
more closed than um, what you see from a lot of Western studios,
Yeah.
who are a little more talkative and yeah, but I'm not on like Japanese like
Yeah.
Twitter. Like maybe there's like a bunch of shit going down
Yeah.
about the Elden Ring that no one is picking up on.
Yeah.
But no, it's usually a lot of Japanese companies like when they're ready to talk, then like a lot of talking happens. Like
Yeah.
Miyazaki
Yeah.
isn't averse to doing interviews.
Yeah.
When he gets around to doing a project, he's all over the circuit, and I'm sure
Yeah.
when Elden Ring gets to that point, but I think they've been honestly smart
Hmm.
to if they don't exactly know when it's coming, if it's been really impacted by COVID and like their entire development model has been kind of disrupted as a result of a lot of remote development, then it like makes sense to just like, hey, don't do anything till you can like really
Yeah.
like at this point, like would it be better to show up with a trailer that says fall 2021, knowing that it's going to be delayed to spring 2022, or
Yeah.
do you wait till fall 2021,
Yeah.
have the delay internally,
Yeah.
and then release a trailer that says spring
Yeah.
2022?
Yeah. I think the thing in this case that's like a little unprecedented to me and just a little strange is like you have one of the most popular developers of like the last decade, like for people following games, so many articles about Dark Souls over the last decade. Looking back through your own, like you've written plenty, everyone has stuff to say
Hmm.
about Dark Souls.
Yeah, I've been cashing in on Souls Rage
Yeah.
for Souls Bait
Yeah.
for as long as I've at least finally gotten when I finally got into the games and
Yeah.
could be a part of it.
Yeah, because it's had such a big impact. And then you have arguably the most popular author of the last decade coming together, and they say, "Hey, we're doing a project together," and then they go dead silent for 2 years.
Oh, yeah, the what was the headline from it was like Deadspin. It was like, George R. R. Martin has no pages. Was there like a funny blog about him and his endless teasing of a
Yeah,
new Thrones book, and like the fact that he pairs with From Software and then immediately like From Software has no pages is just the
yeah,
funniest goddamn thing. Even though my guess is his involvement in that
yeah,
game is like I can't speak from an insider perspective, but my guess is it was a lot of like world building,
yeah,
Bible stuff, and then he will do a bunch of interviews promoting it. But
yeah,
I don't know that he's in there telling
yeah,
Miyazaki like how many hairs should be on the dragon boss
yeah,
in
exactly.
this
Yeah,
game.
and that was actually something I was curious to ask you. Like having From Software has such a defined style, and the Souls games are such a, even if it's sometimes hard to like totally get at the heart of a Souls game, and everyone seems to have something else they pick from. Like having someone like George R. R. Martin come in, what do you think? What sort of effect do you think that really has on From Software and Elden Ring for people? Because it's going to hit. I'm sort of curious on two fronts. What you think it might affect as far as like the actual game itself, and then like is this like, I'm sure from Bandai Namco side it's good marketing, but I'm also curious like is this from, do you think this is From Software hitting a wider audience? Do you think that will play out in the game, or do you think this is going to be something where a lot of book nerds come here from Game of Thrones excited to play a video game and then they get the Souls experience?
Have no idea. I
Yeah.
don't you know and that's what makes like curious to like learn more beyond just
Yeah.
the initial press release of his involvement and presuming that he'd be involved in like high concept world building because yeah, you play a From Software game, you play a lot of the games that Miyazaki has had creative oversight over, and like the man doesn't seem to need any help on the world
Yeah.
building front. So I don't, you know, like in terms of like, what does Martin bring to the table? I'm not even trying to, bring the man down in his own, genius and his own work. It's more, like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like he's filling a weakness.
Yeah.
Miyazaki plays in fantasy just fine, right? Like there's
Yeah.
nothing about the Souls games that doesn't suggest he can't play in that sandbox,
Yeah.
rightfully on his own. And so I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I'm curious, but
Yeah.
could it also be the case that the Elden Ring had come out, they never announced that Martin was involved and like I wouldn't
Yeah.
know the difference. I think that's like entirely possible
Yeah.
as well. So it is one of those things where I would like to
Yeah.
know more about what it means. I think
Yeah.
it's cool that you're seeing folks like that like crossover, have
Yeah.
interest in working with one another. So like a broader level, it's neat to
Yeah.
see. Usually the cross pollination you get between mediums is like George R. R. Martin is like partnering with Miyazaki to do an adaptation of Dark
Yeah.
Souls for HBO, which like no thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd watch it,
Yeah.
but also no thanks.
Yeah.
So the notion that it's the other way around of Martin coming in to, to consult or work or contribute to the world building of a video game is inherently neat because I
Yeah.
mean I think it speaks to the medium itself is like we're attracting talent to work on its things as opposed to the other way around,
Yeah.
which is often how it's gone with video games.
Yeah, yeah, it's something that I don't think they will do at all, but it's interesting like to me just the idea of hitting a wider audience. I know that with like Sekiro they were working on getting better at tutorializing, and I think over the series they've clearly gotten a little better at onboarding players, even though Sekiro also had a
Yeah, or like writing accurate descriptions of
yeah,
what a stat does so that the
yeah,
players know what
yeah,
they're doing. I mean, I think
yeah,
they have done I think, I'm sure they'll be defenders of anything, especially
yeah,
when you're talking about but I do believe they've done, and like Sekiro is a really good example of that, a great job of maintaining the essence of what
mhm,
is really interesting about their games while also correctly identifying like ways that it's just like okay, like obfuscation is cool, being vague and mysterious is cool, but also there are ways of doing that that enhance the play experience,
Yeah.
that also just allow people to like engage with it the way they would like. And I think they, like the interface changes
Yeah.
and things like that have gone that direction. Like, hey, all we need is Elden Ring
Yeah.
to like. They should just the first thing they should do is like just put out a press release. We don't need to learn anything new about the game, but it's like Elden Ring will have difficulty options, and just like, oh, like that's what I want. I want chaos. I
Uh,
want me as George R. Martin to be like, oh, I showed up to the office today to play Elden Ring on easy mode. We're working on refining the balance. Like
uh,
that's what I'm here for. Is that yeah? Martin came in to work on the world building, but then was finally the one to convince Miyazaki to
yeah.
put in a difficulty slider.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be whew, I don't know. I don't know if I could handle the discourse following from software caving on that. But it is interesting there because it is that thing where just from software is so much themselves. So to have like any outside stimulus come in is at this point how can we know how to affect it? But it's just so weird because they're so much about their own thing. And in a discussion you had on Waypoint Radio with Austin, I think it was back in 2019 in December. You were talking about the Decade of Souls and how you liked in Sekiro that the story, like you were just saying now, like the story was like a little bit easier to understand, but there's still plenty of like world building ephemera that you could get into. Do you want and do you think that that might be the direction they continue to go, where maybe there's a little bit like, because let's face it, like I'm a huge Souls fan. Like Dark Souls 1 is one of my favorite games of all time. It doesn't have much of a story. It has really cool themes, but like if you're talking about plot points, it's like ring a bell, grab it's like a MacGuffin fest.
Yeah.
So it's like, do you think that they might Sekiro had a more character
But also a
driven.
player character,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly.
that's what I'll be curious to see where Elden Ring
Hmm.
lands because I would assume that you'll be able to, it'll, borrow from, it'll carry the tradition of Souls forward in which you're creating a character. There are like you have more options in terms of build,
Yeah.
whereas Sekiro was very much like a more contained,
Yep.
authored experience in terms of that, and then they honed in and a wildly different direction with
Yeah.
the specificity of the combat and the parrying. Um, but I don't know. But it's also like it's like I'm. It's weird for to ask me because I don't think I'm a weirdo in this regard, but I'm take it or leave it with like
Hmm.
the storytelling in Souls. Like it's not what I'm there for,
Yeah.
right? Like I'm there for the immaculate combat. I'm
Yeah.
there for the enemy design. I love the world and Bloodborne is my favorite. That's my
Hmm.
favorite world. It's my favorite like aesthetic. I could barely tell you what happened in that game,
Yeah.
like, both when I played it and when I watched lore videos that
Yeah.
explained everything that was going on, because it's just not my thing. I don't read the item
Yeah.
descriptions, like, but I get that that's,
Hmm.
a huge, appeal for a lot of people, and I do think if Elden Ring ends up piggybacking from Sekiro and finding a way to have a more approachable story through line while also keeping, like you said, the ephemera. Like, I don't need the item descriptions to become like hyper specific and easy to understand. Like,
Yeah.
I get that part of the fun for a huge part of the audience is reading that stuff,
Yeah.
putting it together themselves, watching, lore videos that kind of piece together those stories. I think you can keep in the same way that you can tweak an interface. I think there's a
Hmm.
world in which the stories are a little more straightforward, at least in terms of like what is happening.
Yeah.
And you can still keep like all the other stuff that people like about the storytelling, the broader storytelling that
Yeah.
happens in a Souls game.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And obviously, as my name may suggest, I am big into the story and lore, but I totally.
You're the opposite of me. You're like running in the complete other
Yeah.
direction where like a piece of lore drops and I'm like, all right, do I have to pick that up? And like you're looking at the object and trying to,
Yeah.
but I get it. Like I think I'm sure some of that is informed by like my job, which is like I'm like playing a thing, moving on to the next thing. But it's also just the case that I don't know, like it's just never.
Yeah.
That's just not what I ended up coming to the series
Yeah.
for. Like the visceral thrill
Yeah.
of conquering a fight,
Yeah.
and the low lows of failing at those fights, like, really truly is at the core of what I like about those games and what keeps me coming back.
Yeah, and I think that part of the reason it works that way and why you have that dichotomy is because From is so good at marrying like theme with the narrative, but also with the play. So if you're
Mhm.
coming, and that's what sort of pushes me through. Like I'm someone who like plays a lot of games on easy. I don't really like difficult games. Like I tend to play normal. I'm not a challenge person
This is
even.
so funny. I don't what?
But it's always been like, for instance, like Halo 3 drops, I play it on easy so I can find out what happens to Master Chief. But like for Dark Souls, the only way I
Huh.
could get more story is by continuing, and they don't give me an option. So then I played through it, and that's always been the thing sort of dragging me along. But it's also the fact that the struggle as a player and the mechanics do work so well with the themes of this world,
Sure,
and,
yeah.
and it allows for players coming from these radically different approaches to get right into it. It's sort of funny, like to tangent for a second. Like I've been playing a lot of Returnal and
Mhm.
listening to you talk about it. Like I'm totally into like the world building and not so much the personal story. The personal story is pretty interesting, but the world building and finding out like what the heck is happening is keeping me. And the mechanics are fun, and it's a tough game, and I'm terrible at it, but I keep pushing. And it's not. It's another game where, because they make the theme so much about the play, that I think it allows people coming from wildly different perspectives to be dragged on. And I think it's only because like the world building in a game like Returnal or like Dark Souls is so good that it pulls this wide audience and sort of creates the tension for some people who don't want to engage, because I might not be mechanically driven, but at the same time I'm not worried about failure. It's never been a thing that bothers me in games, like
Mhm.
just dying over and over again. In fact, it's something in these games that you'd hope after 5 games you'd pick up some things like, oh, don't make that last attack. But I'm that guy who, after like so many games, like I'm playing the Demon Souls remake, and I still go for that last hit when I know I'm gonna get bopped if I make the swing. But it's just that impatience going there. But um sort of taking, so when it comes to your like blind playthrough, and I'm curious how this intersects, like I know that you've reviewed Souls games in the past, and that's obviously a very different experience, like than something for like Elden Ring necessarily, where you're not doing reviews as much as you're doing pieces about them. But what is a blind playthrough like for you? And also sort of tacked onto that, like when the Souls games get announced, like for your job, do you end up finding and reading all the interviews and watching all the trailers, or do you? I know, particularly with the Souls games, I know people who make a lot of content for Souls games and stuff, and they sort of make a living off of it, but yet they'll go in totally dark. I'm just curious, sort of how you get into like a blind playthrough and sort of your process.
I just yeah, technically it's my job to like read about video games, be knowledgeable about them. But I'm like anyone else, like this was a hobby that turned into a career,
Yeah.
and there are games that I find to be more precious than others. And so, I can't in good conscience for my job like go on a complete like media blackout and not know anything.
Yeah.
Um and yet I will not go I will go out of my way to, like, not try and read
Hmm.
everything, especially because that's not really what I'm being asked to do. Like, if
Yeah.
my job 15 years ago, where I'm writing tons of news stories, writing, 6 or 7 blogs a day, well, yeah, like, I would probably then be writing more about, an Elden Ring or a Bloodborne or whatever game in the lead up to that release, because I would be doing trailer breakdowns and Easter eggs and things like that. I don't really do stuff like that anymore as part
Hmm.
of my day-to-day job. And so I can just be like, that's cool.
Yeah.
I'll just watch the trailer. And, if an interview goes viral because there's like an interesting quote, or if I have the opportunity to, interview, someone associated with the games myself, I'll do that. But otherwise, I try to like keep some of that surprise
Hmm.
to myself when I load up the game. And so uh, that has been it was funny, I think both with Bloodborne and so when I saw Bloodborne for the first time at E3, I saw the trailer, I saw, like, the Project Beast leak,
Yeah.
like everyone else, and then there was the proper trailer at E3, And then the only way to see that game running in person at E3 was to be what they call an E3 judge, and that means like like Jeff Keighley's, picks a person
Hmm.
from, one outlet, from each publication gets to pick someone that is the judge, and then they get to go see certain special demos that other people don't. And part of the classification of being able to be awarded an award as a judge, the game has to be playable. And so it's like funny what the definition of that is sometimes, where like sometimes it's like you'll go see a demo and it's like, you can move the analog stick. Look, the room moves. And then that's it. Or with Bloodborne, I was a giant bomb and Brad Shoemaker was the judge. And so he was going to go play Bloodborne. And I managed to convince the PR person to be like, can I just watch him play? And he's like, "You're not supposed to." It's like, "Please just let me watch him play. I won't say that. I won't tell other people at other websites that you let me do it." And he was like, "Okay, fine." So I got to watch Brad play Bloodborne. And then I remember like the following PAX West, it was like the first appointment I made was like there was a public demo of Bloodborne, and I showed up for it. I think I played for about 45 seconds, died, and was like shuffled away. Like the most depressing thing in the world. Because that game really, that's like my favorite Souls game. Like
Yeah.
that's the one that really like clicked for me. And then Sekiro was similar, where I went with Austin to see a demo of it. Or they hadn't announced they were showing Sekiro, and then a friend of mine, Jason Schreier, I believe, texted me. It was like, "Hey, make sure you book the mystery Activision demo." I was like, "Really? Like, I don't need to see Crash Bandicoot or Call of Duty." Like, and he's like, "No, like, it's the new FromSoft game." And I was like, "Oh, all right, I'll book that." And so Austin and I went, and Austin was our judge. So once again, I keep finding myself surrounded by judges. I never get to be the judge. Someone else is always the judge. But so they show us like a demo of Sekiro, and they're like, "Come to the
Yeah.
laptop over here," and it's like just Sekiro running on this laptop. And Austin got to play it for like 3 minutes, so they could prove that the game was playable. But yeah, I mean, like I said, all told, I try and keep myself kind of in the dark so that um, I get to have the fun of
Yeah.
experiencing as much of it for the first time when I actually sit down in a way that is closer to what the audience is doing. But it is weird, like because I always try to like know who my friends are that are playing it at the same time, because obviously a huge part of playing a Souls game is that, well, everyone gets the game and then everyone starts talking about what they're finding, and they're
Yeah.
going on Reddit or different message boards and sharing observations, challenges, lore. Yeah, but that's like millions of people. And
Yeah.
it's like for me, it's like, oh, well, I have my network of 4 people that I can
Yeah.
ask questions to in a game that is, and like Bloodborne was like the most, specific version of that, in which like at least Dark Souls 3, I understood what Dark Souls was. Like I
Yeah.
got through that just fine. But like Bloodborne was like, I remember when the turn happens in that game
Yeah.
where you can like see the things that were, that when I got like knocked over the head and dragged away, like
Oh yeah.
I was losing my mind. I
Yeah.
was like messaging someone. I was like, "What the fuck is going on in this game?"
Yeah.
And like the hand that reaches up and like you have to imagine like experiencing all those things and having nobody to talk
Hmm.
to. Yeah, I'm just like in my apartment drinking a beer, just screaming at myself,
Yep.
taking notes, and then the next day trying to find anybody to talk to about
Yeah.
it. So it's a weird experience, but it's very interesting. It is one of the I like that part of my job,
Yeah.
that I get to have these sort of like weird isolated experiences, especially with games that are giant
Yeah.
kind of mystery boxes.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been able to get like not like the press review copy, but like the C tier YouTuber review copy that they'll send like just a little
It's
bit
still
ahead.
slightly early,
Yeah.
right? Like
And
it's just before
and
release.
it is like and that's why I always like when I'm talking with someone who gets to do that review thing, because it's such a different game when there's no wikis, there's nobody, and yeah, like you said,
There's
like
nobody to summon,
yeah, you have a few people, and it's like
like there, you have to, you'll like, in a game like Bloodborne, I can't remember how they handle it specifically, but one, it's not even, often with these games that you get them, if you get them like a month in advance, it's often the multiplayer is not turned on.
yeah,
It's just like, yeah, like, sorry, like none of that shit's gonna work until the game's out. Or it's like, uh, so there's only like a couple thousand people playing and you're one of them. So, like, try to play at like 2 p.m.
Yeah.
Eastern, and if you try to like ring a bell in Bloodborne, maybe you'll be able
Yeah.
to like connect with another player.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like that weird part where you're not having the same experience that the audience is going to have
Yeah.
because it's either like features aren't quite literally flipped
Mhm.
on yet, or there's just not enough people for it to
Yeah.
like function properly.
Yeah, you never realize how much like in Souls like the message system, it's like such even if you try not to read the messages, something about the Souls games was obviously when there's like cluster of messages, like it kind of informs what's about to happen, especially if you've played the games. But when you're playing it like before people have gotten into it and you're walking around and it's just like dead empty and you see that like one message out there, you check it's like not a developer and it's like actually someone else. You're like, oh holy shit, like
Well, and
there's
I
someone
but
else.
it does make for a weird
Yeah,
experience where this happened. I think this happened to me in Bloodborne, where I put down like a particularly useful
yeah,
message, and because I was first,
yeah,
or like in the first wave, it just populated so many people's
yeah,
games, and so I would just be constantly getting notifications and like people liked. I was like, I get it. Can I mute this? Like,
yeah,
I don't need 7,000 notifications that
yeah,
people liked my message, but then you do feel like you're like an explorer when
yeah,
you're playing those games early because you are, like,
yeah,
you're one of the first to, like, go into these worlds, as an outsider, and it's kinda scary and weird, but it is kind of fun where, like, to discover something like an invisible wall or
yeah.
just something you would think is worth pointing out and putting it down and being like, "Shit, like, I'm, like, one of the first
Yeah.
people to do that." That is kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. When you find an illusory wall, when there's not a message in front of it, you feel like the biggest badass for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And so sort of rolling into that, like when it comes to Elden Ring, in your Dark Souls 3 review, you were pretty positive about Dark Souls 3, and this was years ago now because
Mhm.
despite I think people feeling in some ways like Dark Souls is active, it's been almost a half decade since we got like a Souls game, an RPG from. Um, you said like you liked it, but that also it had sort of lost the mystery in some sense. Like it wasn't so much you. I think you and made the analogy of like it's like some friends getting together versus like the master and an apprentice. And
Mhm.
do you think that like with the very small amount we know about Elden Ring, like do you have hope that it's going to be that shift in what you're doing enough that it's gonna mix it up in a way like Sekiro or Bloodborne? I feel like I'm one of the people where I like Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, like Sekiro sort of work better for me, and I think that's because they each have a more distinct twist. Whereas when sequels, it does lose a little bit.
Right.
And do you are you hopeful like what do you want to see from Elden Ring to really change? Because I think we understand that it's going to be Souls in its core. Like one of the few things we know is Dark Souls combat is sort of the fundamentals they're working off of, and then they're applying it to an open world, and that's their basis for making changes. So are you looking forward to that? Do you think that's the direction you want to see? Like from software develop something, or like where are you sort of at with that conceptually?
Hope I'm a little more surprised than I expect to be
Hmm.
at this point, in terms of the combat. Like, that is part of the joy, like, part of the joy of having playing Bloodborne after playing Dark Souls 1 and 2 was that they took away the shield
Yeah.
and actually, like, actively mocked you if you tried to use,
Yeah.
the little dinky wooden shield. And what I liked about that was that it was hostile to the player trying to play the game the way they've played it before, in
Hmm.
which, a developer can introduce a bunch of new styles or approaches, but like it's the case that in Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, like I kind of played the same character, right?
Yeah.
In Demon Souls, I stumbled into a magic character because I played Dark Souls 1 and 2, and then I think I played Demon Souls before Bloodborne came out, and
Yeah.
when I played Demon Souls, I'd heard, like, "The magic's broken," and
Yeah.
so I was like, "Well, that's what I'm gonna do,
Yeah.
is I'm gonna try and play a character that I wouldn't normally play," which is just kind of a generic soldier, sword and shield,
Yeah.
character, and so that's what I'm gonna default to, and so what was nice about Bloodborne was that you just couldn't do that.
Yeah.
You had to play differently. You had to play speedy. You had to do engage in parrying. had to use, a gun. And so it forced you to play differently. You settled into a new style of like, this is the character you're playing, but it was different because the game forced you into that direction. Sekiro was exactly the same way. You can't play that
Yeah.
game the way you played it. There's lots of lessons that apply,
Yeah.
right? Like your historical knowledge of how these games are designed and function is helpful, but you can't just rely on
Hmm.
how you played the other games to play in Sekiro. And so, I guess I will say, like, without knowing,
Yeah.
more about what the wrinkles are, like, if it is just like drop my Dark Souls character into a bigger world, maybe that is what they do there is compelling enough
Hmm.
to make up for the fact that the combat is a little samey. But I am holding out. They've done at this point, like they if they were just gonna do Dark Souls in open world, I feel like it would have been more profitable to just call it Dark Souls 4.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they're partnering with Namco again.
Yeah.
Like they own Dark Souls.
Yeah.
And so if they were just going to do, open Souls, then, why not just, call it Dark Souls and set it in a different part of the timeline
Yeah.
and, do whatever you want to do with the plot. Um I would hope in Elden Ring there's more that we don't understand, or maybe
Yeah.
it's like you can get so specific in your build structure that you can have, what some of the leaks have suggested that, there might be some stealth, like you
Mm.
can crouch, like, oh, like if you could go like a full assassin
Yeah.
type character that isn't just I'm wearing assassin garb and can roll fast, but
Yeah.
like actually have like a Sekiro
Yeah.
adjacent sort of character, like that's really interesting to me. And
Yeah.
so usually when people ask like what do I want to see, it's like I want to be surprised. Like that's part
Yeah.
of the reason I like From Software is that
Mhm.
they if you asked me after Dark Souls 2, like, "What do I want?" I was like, "More Dark Souls."
Yeah.
And, like, they did do that with 3, and then as it turned out, like, it turns the candy you've had before tastes good, but, like, you've had that
Yeah.
candy before, and that's what made part of the reason Bloodborne so special was because it was not what I was asking for, and
Yeah.
so they're very good at that. Sekiro was also not what I would have asked for, and even though I liked that one less because just the combat didn't click for me
Mhm.
as much, I appreciated, deeply loved the fact that it was its own thing, and so
Yeah.
I'm curious to see what the identity is of it beyond just open big map Souls, and I have to imagine
Yeah.
that there's more to it than that,
Yeah.
and I'm very curious to find out what that is.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's part of we'll watch the leak trailer near the end, and I think as someone who's spent far too much time looking at like roughly 2 minutes of poor quality footage, um, I think it is kind of, I'm not gonna say disappointing, but I think the reaction and like for instance, the video we'll be watching is the video like I uploaded. I stitched them all together, and I've seen thousands of people comment, and the number of times I've seen Dark Souls 4 is about, I think it's like 19%. Like I decided to just like math it out and see,
Yep.
which Dark Souls 4 that ends up being like 500 people out of like 2,000 comments or saying something along those lines. And I don't really blame them I because there's no context there. Like we've fought a dragon before, we've seen giants, we've literally casted those spells that they show in that leaked trailer, and I don't hold it against From Software because we weren't supposed to see that. Like Bandai
Right.
Namco, like that was never supposed to be seen. That was for like some investors an indeterminate amount of time ago, and so I don't hold it against them. But it's also that thing like you're saying is like I also like being surprised, and I don't want Dark Souls 1 again, but I like the weird mechanics in Dark Souls 1, especially when it came to like grave lording and like weird stuff like the bell ringing, miracle resonance, those little creatures that show up. I'm blanking on the name right now, but just I don't want those again, but there is that magic where I feel like Demon Souls and Dark Souls and Bloodborne gave you these weird systems and you were just like not sure what to do with them. Even if in Bloodborne like Insight didn't end up being that cool, you still had a bunch of other stuff and it was such a weird playthrough that I do think when you see like big Dark Souls, it doesn't quite hit the same way. And
Right.
it's the same thing where I'm really hoping that they've taken that in ways that they just weren't able to express in that leaked trailer. And it seems like even if they add stealth, it's such an interesting thing because the stealth system in Sekiro is quite a bit more advanced than Dark Souls while still being pretty light. So I could see it going in there, but it does make me wonder like even in Sekiro it's like, oh, can I make an assassin character? But then when I get to a boss, do I have to switch back to Dark Souls mode? And you know, it's sort of in Sekiro where you were a shinobi and then you kind of had to be a samurai every time you got into
And they build the world
yeah.
appropriately, right? Like if you had an option to build a samurai
Yeah.
type character in Elden Ring, but that it wasn't a requirement. Well, it's like, well, now they're not going to build the
Yeah.
structures in the environment so that you can like grapple around them. And so
Yeah.
I'm so curious to
Yeah.
see what they do with that. Like,
Yeah.
I just don't know. Like, I think open world, all that means is a big map, and
Yeah.
then what you do with that is a lot
Yeah.
different from studio to studio. And I think companies like Ubisoft have sort of like built in our minds like,
Yeah.
oh, like where's the tower that I climb in Dark Souls
Mhm.
to open the map. And I'm just all that does is create a big pile of space.
Yeah.
And one of the things about From that they're known for is density,
Yeah.
in which they don't
Exactly.
have and like, so what do they do, what do they do when they open that up? Like,
Yeah.
how do they apply their sort of taste and density
Mhm.
and not sprawl? Like, what does that mean in a big space?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, but I'm excited for them to try and answer that
Yeah.
question. And that's just not something in the leaked footage that like we get any sense of what does that mean. I
Yeah.
mean, if it truly is like huge and like a lot of the game is like you like actually exploring and
Yeah.
like finding a hidden dungeon, what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, all that sounds really, really exciting, but it's like, you just don't
Yeah.
it makes sense for me that in the trailer that would like you normally you'd see this trailer and like come back at 2 p.m. and Miyazaki's gonna do a guided gameplay demo,
Yeah.
and then you would see all the stuff that you're,
Yeah.
looking for.
Yeah, exactly. It seems super hard to pitch that on its end. And I really like that you mentioned the density because, like, that's been the thing for me. Like, as I've been contemplating this question of Elden Ring, I'm like, From Software, essentially in their history, has not done anything truly open. And they haven't even really, like, Kingsfield essentially to Dark Souls isn't that much of a leap except for in technology. And then they pulled it
Right.
out in the third person. So them tackling open world, which is such a, as you mentioned, like codified to, like it has differences, but it generates such a defined picture in people's heads of what it means. I think that regardless, From Software is going to give us something like weird for what that genre means and like if what that open means. And that's the biggest thing to me too is that density. Like Dark Souls is essentially corridors, dressed up corridors, because they like to control the narrative of your encounters so specifically. So what happens when all of a sudden you're thrown in like a Breath of the Wild type situation where you're approaching this camp from like whichever angle you want? And that's hard for me to imagine Dark Souls in there, which is exciting and also like just the big question mark for me. Like, is that enough to make it really special, or does that end up feeling like big Dark Souls? And like, but there is more tacked on than just that initial feeling of like, oh yeah, Dark Souls in an open world. It was kind of open world already, so now it's just more so. It's like, well, when you add a horse in, all of a sudden you're telling me I can move this fast or this fast, and it's just like, how does From Software do their From Software thing, given that sense of scale that they've never even come close to allowing a player to move at such different speeds until Sekiro. And then even then, Sekiro is so different from Dark Souls that the idea of making it an RPG and giving you that freedom, like I still just when I'm like open world Dark Souls, like in most open world games, I'm doing some side quests, I'm collecting some things. The idea of doing
Like,
that in
is there a quest log in this game? Like,
yeah,
if they quite literally even just made that change, that's big.
that'd be
Like, if like
huge.
there was a it's like they're gonna do something that's sprawling,
Yeah,
you'd have part of the reason they can get away with like cheating you out of accomplishing side quests
yeah,
because they're impossible to track until you read a FAQ later.
yeah,
Like, part of that is because like you are doing ultimately like a linear level to level
yeah,
progression that is dressed up in something that feels bigger.
yeah,
And if it truly is bigger, it's like, well, okay, so is it going to be as simple as like, well, it's a big world, but like you can only go to the desert area,
hmm
right? You know what I mean? And then that's how they condense it
yeah,
into the density that we're known for. But if it's wider than that, in which you truly do have, more of a Breath of the Wild, like, options in which they're like systems colliding, with one another. Like that's not something they've ever done before,
No.
and like that's really exciting. Like
Yeah.
if that's the direction they go in, and I think that's part of what has fueled the Elden Ring
Hmm.
mystery industrial complex
Yeah.
is because we don't know.
Yeah.
Like it's just like it's big and there's a horse and like that's like all we know about this freaking game.
Yeah.
But like that's a lot to go, like that's both not a lot and like a lot to go on
Yeah.
because your brain can then
Yeah.
fill in, and I would actually say what's like interesting is the trailer I think is actually like reset and if anything lowered
Yeah.
expectations. But I think there's now an opportunity
Yeah.
for them to look at this and then like come out of the gate like and really blow people away.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I guess it's just like Dark Souls, but big.
Yeah.
And if they're, whatever they've got else, going on that we
Yeah.
didn't see, I think it can really grab people in a
Yeah.
way that, it's just because the fact that people, think they know what to expect at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. I did kind of wonder how that was at, because when I uploaded the trailer, I, like, for whatever reason, the stars aligned, and the version I uploaded seemed to be the one that most people watched. And I was like, it's approaching like 1 million views. And I'm like, Bamco's gonna come slap me right in the face for that. And I was expecting it, like waiting for it, and then waiting for it. And then I was like, nope,
Yeah,
they don't
Japanese
give a shit.
companies are very aggressive about that
Yeah.
stuff or can be, right? You look at, the history
Yeah.
of Atlas
Yeah.
specifically is one of those companies that like, the embargoes they send out to press like will even have little
Yeah.
things that are like, so we can't guarantee the Japanese side of this company is not just gonna like take your videos down. Sorry, like we don't control that. I was like, but you're the company. It's like we don't control that. Like they do their own thing.
Yeah.
And so I do think you have to. I think you're right. It is worth acknowledging that they haven't done very much to remove this material
Yeah.
when they could have done DMCA requests
Yeah.
on social media. They could have done it on YouTube. Um, and whether that's just whether that was on purpose or whether it was just kind
Hmm.
of what they just realized, well, you're not going to be able to stomp it out. It's probably better to just let it go,
Yeah.
and let it be free marketing. It's yeah, they could have erased it or at least tried to erase
Yeah.
it and made it harder to find, and they didn't really
Yeah.
seem to do much of any of that.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, okay, fine. Yeah, and it's that opportunity where I do feel like it did help lower expectations a little bit. Did create some disappointment, and I know from what I've heard from like um some insider people is that From Software is concerned that like the idea of it not being Dark Souls is important to them and that having
Mhm.
its own identity. So it doesn't really help that uphill battle, but it does, like you're saying, like if that is really old ass footage, like when I talked to Dan Tack about like Dark Souls 3, he mentioned how he went to From Software's offices, and did their like Game Informer coverage, and then by the time he was writing up the cover story, Bandai Namco told him half the mechanics that he couldn't talk about them anymore because they changed them. So the idea of seeing this like old footage means, for all I know, they're like that hardly even looks like the game we have now.
Right,
Like, so we're
right.
we're not concerned. And when we do come out with our trailer, people are just going to be happy to see that it's so much different because the world looks different and everything's much more refined. Because that seems to be what From Software does, and something I appreciate about them is. Um, it doesn't seem like they're like making this like perfect art piece where they're delicately applying each paint. It seems more like they're just dumping paint all over the place. They just have their giant
Right.
mountain of ideas and then they just chip away until they leave what they want.
Mhm.
So, so why don't we check out the leaked trailer now? We've been dancing
Okay.
around it, and
Sure.
yeah, let's take a look. Beautiful upscaled 720p.
Oh, it's gorgeous. I do these big giant creatures are
Oh,
probably my favorite bit in
yeah.
the whole thing because I feel like there is such an opportunity with the big space to have like just enormous creatures at a
Hmm.
scale that we have not really seen
Yeah.
in the games before. Like that, like the idea of like if you're in a big space and you're just constantly looking around you, and there's just huge ass shit everywhere scaring you. That seems great.
Yeah.
I suppose you can't be talked into turning back. Very well, then.
And I'm kind of with you now. I kind of wonder if like that the camp stuff that they're showing
Mhm.
isn't some sort of like indication, that you're gonna have these sort of like different outposts that you're gonna be able to tackle
Yeah.
in different ways, which is cool. Like
Yeah.
that's not usually how they set up their encounters, and like
Yeah.
that in and of itself, by like giving up some control,
Mhm.
is it like itself like a big
Yeah,
change
exactly.
for how they even set up their world. I also feel like I couldn't help it whenever watching this footage that feels like they're just like apologizing for the way they nerfed like the lighting
Yeah.
for the torches in Dark Souls 2. It's like,
Right.
no, no, we can do it. The technology is here now.
Yeah.
We can have the torches bounce lighting off of the walls just fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that impression because you see them holding torches everywhere, and then also like the colors are just a little bit more saturated. They're a little bit
Hmm.
more like along the Dark Souls 2 scale. But so there you have it. It's been 698 days, and that's the leak trailer, which hasn't been out quite as long, but that's been like March 1st. It feels like forever
Hmm.
ago now, but that is from March there, and yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how they capitalize on that. And I do sort of hope like, like if we're saying like if it at its least, if it's like Breath of the Wild but like Dark Souls combat and you maybe not the physics stuff, but like I'm not going to be super disappointed on a conceptual level because I like Dark Souls combat. I played a bunch of them, and I just do hope that like if they're taking an idea like open world, that it does mean more than just big Dark Souls. But
Means to them, right? Like,
yeah,
because like open world in an Assassin's Creed game is different than open world in a Breath of the Wild game, and
yeah,
yet you would describe both of them as open world,
yeah,
right? And so it's like we use open world as a genre when it's really just a descriptive of
yeah,
like an approach to like map size and
yeah,
map design. And so, if you were just to tell me From Software is going to make an open world game, it's like great. I don't know what that
yeah,
means, but I'm excited to find out, and so that's what I always come back to is
yeah,
that's what I'm excited
yeah,
to find out. It's like, okay, if they've decided to like go to put themselves in unfamiliar territory, which is that they are going to give up some of the authorship of the level design to some degree and give some more player expansiveness, exploration. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean for the design? Because it's a different way of
hmm,
designing encounters and levels, and I'm sure it will still like funnel you. You'll start big,
yeah,
go small, right? Like you will enter places that
hmm,
have your traditional dungeons in which they can do, what they've done in the past. But um, yeah, I am excited to see how they, for themselves and for players, answer that question of like, what does it mean to have a big open map in a
yeah,
in a in a Souls game, and I'm excited to see them answer it.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And hopefully we will get some information soon. We are both optimistic in a way in which I wouldn't want someone to bet any money on it, but
Right. Yeah, but
feeling
so
good,
I'm feeling
feeling good.
good. I'm feeling but like that we're recording this May 6th. A lot can change between now
Yeah.
and, E3 week, but
Yep.
as of May 6th, 2021, I'm feeling optimistic we'll know more at E3.
Yeah. Feeling good. So thank you so much for coming on today, Patrick, and sharing your soul's insights and just general passion. It's always nice just to hear how no one seems to approach these games the same way. Like there's always just that your life everyone brings their life experience and their stuff into it in this way that makes I think that's part of what makes these games special and sort of hard to pin down because there's such a personal whatever for some reason people get real personal about their souls.
Totally.
So
No, absolutely. And I think that's part of uh they demand so much
mhm.
of you that you can't help but give
Yeah,
yourself over to them, and
yeah,
that's part of the fun, I think, because and it's, obviously not for everyone, but it is
yeah,
part of the attraction for me.
yeah,
Is I like the fact that the game grabs me by the collar
yeah,
and like says, "Hey, you're going to pay attention And yeah, I'm curious to see how Elden Ring gets me to do that too.
Yeah. So, where is there anything you'd like to plug, or where people on the internet can find you? Anything you want to direct them towards specifically? Because I know you have your work.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I write and report and podcast for a website called Waypoint over at Vice. You can find all my work and the podcast at waypoint.vice.com. The podcasts are wherever you can get podcasts.
Mhm.
Waypoint Radio is the name of that. You can follow me on Twitter at Patrick Klepek. You can, if you go to my defunct YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Klepek. Basically, I had a second child a year ago and COVID happened.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, there, okay, bye, YouTube
Yeah.
channel and Twitch. That's not gonna,
Yeah.
I need to like reach out to like the couple of people that are like still a subscriber on Twitch. Like, you should give that money to someone else. I'm
Yeah.
not making videos anymore. But if you go to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Patrick Klepek, I have playthroughs for like a bunch of
Nice.
Souls games. If
Yeah.
you want to see, including my original playthrough of Dark Souls, which I played when my wife was out of town for a week, and I was like, all right, fuck it, I'm gonna figure out this game, and ended up being where I fell for the whole
Yeah.
series. So
Yeah. It sounds awesome. And everyone, thank you so much for listening. And tune in. The next one will be out Monday, and we'll see. Last weekend I thought it'd be quiet, and we ended up having some fake leaked footage and who knows what else. So it should be a
was that fake? I didn't see.
it,
Was the new stuff fake?
this
I
this
saw people
yeah.
talking about new stuff, but I didn't know if that
Yeah,
what that was.
it was tough because I talk a lot with Mordecai, who does the daily Elden Ring update, and we were like really like wringing our hands, like, do we talk about this or is this going to be fake? And then no one found anything. Mordecai pulled the trigger, I pulled the trigger, and then immediately after, a few days later, they did pull up some ArtStation stuff where they had flipped the footage and all that. So that was fake, which I was personally happy about because I was not really interested in it because
Gotcha.
as we've been discussing, like Dark Souls decrepit church. Fine. Like I want to see the open world. It's an open world thing. I want to see the
Right.
world. I don't want to see interior shots. So I was kind of like, okay, cool. It's fake. Hopefully we can just get to E3 without any more leaks. I don't think too much exists out there, but there's little bits that I don't think have seen the light of day, and I hope they don't. So I, as far as I'm concerned, I hope the next thing that comes out is official, but that is fake. So you can rest easy knowing that 6 seconds is not, it's not real.
Okay, noted.
So, but we do have the, this is where the Elden Ring community is at. Next week, the Bandai Namco financial report is coming out.
Oh, great.
And I will inevitably look through a financial document that I'm in no way qualified to look at and then talk to people about it. And it will be news on Reddit for like one day. So
There you go.
but yeah, so thanks everyone for listening. Thank you, Patrick, for coming on, and
Thank
we'll
you.
see you for the next Elden Wait.